The Red Brush Precision Rifle Challenge, this week on Mail Call Mondays. Mail Call Mondays is brought to you by Modular Driven Technologies. If you need a chassis system for your precision rifle, check out mdttac.com. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, where Monday could be any day of the week. And I realize we are getting this episode out late, but I did have a match to shoot this weekend, and we had some other things that kind of tied me up a little bit. So now we are getting back around to getting an episode out for you guys. And I wanted to talk about the Sunday match at Red Brush, which is in Newburgh, Indiana. And this was our local series match, and is the Red Brush Precision Rifle Challenge. And this was the season opener, and this is actually the first centerfire rifle match that I have shot this year. I know we are more than halfway through the year, but I have been doing so much gear testing, training, and rimfire stuff that I haven't actually gone out and shot a centerfire rifle match this year. So I figured it was time to get out, knock the cobwebs out, and have some fun. And of course, I did absolutely horribly because I have not been training, but that was totally my fault and not really so much the rig's fault at all. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the setup that I have here, what problems I had, and how I'm going to fix them for the next Red Brush Precision Rifle Challenge series match. So first, let's go down a rundown of the rifle that I have sitting in front of me here. The core of it is a Remington 700 short action. This is a stainless action, just because I didn't want to worry about Cerakoting or rusting or any of that nonsense, so I went with stainless. It is a 308 bolt face because we are running a 6.5 Creedmoor barrel on here. I actually did just pick up a blank receiver. It was for a different project that ended up getting pulled into this project, and we'll see if it ever gets back to the previous budget build project that we were going to work on. So that is the core of the rifle. The barrel I have on here is an International Barrel 6.5 Creedmoor barrel. It is an M24 contour, and it is one of their pre-fits. So that is their own barrel nut that you see right here holding the barrel on. The recoil lug is a Northland Shooter Supply recoil lug, and it is I use that because it works well with their barrel wrench or their action wrench that we use to assemble this guy. Really big beefy lug, works very well. We have an Area 419 Hellfire brake on the end here, and I really like this brake for its toolless ability. So if I want to swap to a suppressor, it's very easy for me just to spin the brake off. I have the Hellfire adapter for the Silencer Co. Hybrid 46, so I can just spin the Hybrid 46 in without any tools to take off the brake and expose the threads or anything. So really nice setup overall. We will have a full review of that coming very soon. The big portion here that you can see is the MDT ACC chassis, and ACC of course stands for Adjustable Core Competition Chassis, and this chassis was designed specifically for competition. We got to have a little bit of insight into the development of it, and it came out fantastically. This is the first match that I've shot with this one, and it worked very, very well for me. I do not have it set up in an ultra heavy style. I just have the 3 sets of weights on the front here to balance it out right in front of the magwell. I have room for 2 more sets of exterior weights if I wish, and I can go ahead and actually put all the interior weights in the barrel channel if I want, and really make this thing a chunky rifle. And of course I could balance that out in the back with the 2 rear weights and then the bag rider, which is also a weight in itself, and really make this a heavy rifle if I wanted to. I don't really want to. I think it's heavy enough. It's about 20 pounds right now, and so it is a heavy enough rifle overall to minimize recoil, allow you to free recoil if you want without really going crazy. The Area 419 brake slows things down on the recoil end pretty well, and I just wanted to balance the chassis out. So overall, it's great, fully adjustable for comb height, for length of pull, for butt pad height, for cant, and pistol grip. So trigger finger length, you can totally dial all that fun stuff in. And it has the integrated Arca rail up front here. So the Sky Pod that we have attached, which is also an MDT product, it can slide anywhere I need on here. A quick turn of the nut here, and I can jettison it and get it off the rifle if I need to. I do have an MDT 10-round magazine. This is their shorter double-stack 10-round magazine, and it has a +2 extension on the bottom of it, mainly because I needed to test out the +2. I wouldn't recommend going this route. It's kind of superfluous. I would suggest just buying the MDT 12-round magazines and run it that way. But if you have a bunch of 10-round AICS magazines laying around, then this thing is a really great cost-effective way to add 2 rounds to those magazines, and I didn't have any issues with it during the match. Coming up top here, we have a Modular Driven Technologies 20 MOA scope rail on here, and then we have the new MDT scope mount up top on that. And then I have a SIG Tango 6 3-18 by 44 power on here, and this is a MOA and MOA scope. So it has the MOA Dev L reticle inside of it, and then MOA turrets on it, and we'll talk about that when we get into the match a little bit. And finally, I have the KRG bolt lift on here, just because I haven't sent this bolt out yet to have a handle put on it. And I have the Hoptic USA quiver on here, so I can put 2 rounds on the side of the gun as well. So I can go into a stage with 14 rounds, 12 in the mag, 2 on the side of the gun. For a 10-round stage, I have to do a lot of screwing up to run out of ammunition on the stage. So that was kind of beneficial. I ran with 2 rounds in it for the whole match. Didn't have any problems with the rounds falling out or getting knocked loose on a barricade or anything. So I can definitely say the Hoptic quiver is good to go. It's a much better option than what I've used before. I've used some loop type round holders before. It becomes very easy to scrape rounds off on a barricade with them, or just pop them with your hand position or something, or a bag hits them and knocks them out. With the quiver, it's a whole lot more structured, durable item to hold rounds in, but it is also significantly more expensive. Lastly, we'll talk about the Sky Pod up here. This is the first match that I've run the Sky Pod, and it worked well, but I am still in the honeymoon phase with it. I'm still getting acquainted with all its quirks, so it's going to take a couple more matches before I have a solid opinion of the Sky Pod. It has a ton of adjustment to it. I can use it as a barricade stop. With this chassis, I can use it as a clamp for barricades if I want. I can spin it around the other way and use it for an extended barricade stop if I need to do that. I can kick the legs forward, kick the legs back. It's got a ton of adjustment to it, so it will definitely warrant its own video from there. And then lastly, this little thing that I've got hanging out here, this is an empty chamber indicator, and it's one that I just cobbled together. I picked up these little flags off of Amazon, and I'll leave a link to those down below. And then this is just a piece of elastic cordage, and then I have a chamber flag that I got from a previous PRS match here that I just drilled a hole through it and ran a split ring for the tag through it and then tied everything in. It works out really nicely because the chamber flag obviously shows me that I have no rounds in the chamber. The elastic keeps the bolt handle pulled forward and keeps the bolt hard against it, so your bolt's not flopping around. The chamber flag's not going to fall out while you're carrying the rifle. And then this guy is just a really big, loud indicator to show me that, hey, I still have a chamber flag in. So when you get on the line and you go and you put your magazine in, if you notice this thing's hanging out there, you stop, take your chamber flag out, and stuff it in your pocket. It makes it a little bit bigger, a little bit bulkier, but being able to notice that I have a chamber flag before I get on the clock, that's kind of an important thing. So Oh, one last thing on it. We are running a Trigger Tech Special trigger. This is a Remington 700, a factory receiver. It has a factory bolt release in it, so we cannot run the diamond trigger in it, which would be my preference. We have to go with the Special because the Special has a built-in bolt release. The diamond does not. There is no option from Trigger Tech at this time for it. And after the issues that we ran into on this match, I absolutely can understand why that is the case. And again, we'll talk more about that later. So that is the overall rifle system. Now I'm going to go through and talk about the various different stages, and we'll talk about how the rifle and how I worked with the rifle on those stages. So this is a 10-stage match, and it was 10 rounds at each stage. So it was 100 rounds total. Now, of course, the time limit was fairly limited. It was 1 minute and 45 seconds, and some of the stages had a lot of movement in that short time period, so there was the possibility to not get all your rounds off. In fact, I rolled into it with only 92 rounds, because that's all the ammo that I had loaded for this match. And thankfully that gave me 4 rounds to spare at the end of the match because I wasn't able to actually get all rounds off on all stages. And the way our range is set up, we have a 500-yard bay, and then we have an almost 400-yard bay. It's like 385 and change. We can push out a little bit further by being creative, but we adjust to that by decreasing time limits, making the obstacles a little bit more difficult, the shooting positions a little bit more difficult, and reducing the target sizes somewhat from what you would see in a regular 1,000-yard PRS or NRL match. So while we're working in a little bit more compact space, it is still a fairly difficult course of fire. So I'm going to run through these stages pretty close to the order that I shot them, although I may get them a little bit out of order because I have slept and ate a couple of times since then. But once everybody got the safety brief and got cut loose, the first stage that I shot was stage 7, which is the rooftop stage. The rooftop stage was again, 10-round stage, 1 minute and 45 seconds, and there were 5 different targets. There was a 225-yard, 25% popper. There was a 6-inch square at 300 yards, a small coyote target at 350 yards, a small pig target at 425 yards, and a small deer-shaped target at 508 yards. Now, when I say it's a deer target, it's like a deer target, not a deer target. So it's deer-shaped, not deer-sized. The stage description was, the shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand, and upon command ascend the right side of the rooftop and engage targets C1 through C5 with 1 round each from near to far and then far to near. So we have a simulated rooftop, which is a pretty heavy-duty affair with shingles and everything. So we used the right side, which was 1 pitch. There are actually 4 different pitches on that rooftop. And on the signal, you run up, you set into your position, you shoot close to far, so you hit that far deer target last. Then you shoot that deer target again as you come back in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is a fairly straightforward stage. It had a short time limit, but it really was not that difficult to get up, get in position. I was running the Coltac backbone, which has an Area 419 clamp on here that goes on my Arca rail, and I had their tricorn bag on the bottom, and this works really well to get right on the crest of that rooftop, and using it right underneath the balance point of the rifle allowed me to get up there, anchor the rifle down. Didn't really matter where my body position was behind it as long as I could see through the scope, and then gas on. The problem was, again, this was really knocking the cobwebs out, busting the rust off, and getting going, and I only got 2 hits on the whole run. I also only got 5 shots off on it, and this is where we can try to prepare pretty well, and then sometimes we have little issues creep in. One of the little issues I had creep in was this setup had less than 300 rounds on it going into the match, and the TriggerTech Special was adjusted as light as this trigger can go. I really would have preferred to put a diamond on it, which has a very light adjustment, but the Special was adjusted as light as it could go. Well, what that caused is when I closed the bolt on the clock in a very rapid, aggressive manner, the striker would follow. It is and isn't a safety issue kind of at the same time. With my hand loads, with the primers that I'm using, I have never had a round go off when the striker has followed the bolt. It's more of an issue if you have a trigger that will allow the bolt to close, hang, and then drop the striker, then you can have a round go off. What this was doing is when I jar the bolt forward, the striker would just follow the cocking angle and release its pressure. Kind of the same thing as if you pull the trigger and close the bolt with the trigger pulled. The striker will just follow that cocking angle on the bolt and release itself. So I would go to press off the trigger and I'd press. Nothing's happening. I'd thump the safety. Safety was in the fire position. And then I'd look down at the back of the cocking piece and realize the rifle was decocked. So I'd have to lift the bolt handle, release the bolt handle, and fire again. And it happened to me several times. It took me out of the whole deal, thus the 2 hits out of 5 shots. So that kind of messed me up a little bit. So I came off the line, cleared the rifle, went back over, grabbed my Allen key out, added a handful of clicks to the adjustment on the trigger, and benefit to both TriggerTech and the MDT chassis. TriggerTech puts their adjustment screw right in the bottom here so you can get at it from the bottom of the rifle, and MDT cuts a slot in the bottom of their trigger guard so you can get your Allen key in there and actually make an adjustment to your trigger without taking anything apart. So that is a hugely beneficial combination. So that should have been a money stage. The targets were not that small. They were not that difficult to hit. The position was fairly stable, but because of the malfunctions, it yanked me out of it. And because I hadn't been training, it wasn't quick for me just to drive through the malfunction and finish the stage. So a little bit of a hiccup starting there. Didn't build my confidence a whole lot. So when you have a total catastrophe for a first stage, that can sometimes affect how your performance is for the next couple of stages. So came off in it, not a lot of confidence in the gun, and even less confidence in my ability to fix the problem, identify the problem, and then prevail through it. But it was what it was. So from that stage, we then went over to stage 8, and we pretty much just went through the order of stages, with one exception that we had to alter because of some backups. But stage 8 was next, and this was over on our 400-yard side, and this is a barricade stage. The target was a 10-inch circle at 385 yards, and the directions were: shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand. On the command engage target A1 with 2 rounds from each of the 5 marked positions on the barricade in any order. So the barricade is a standard stepped type barricade with ports cut in the middle, and the positions that you had to use was a low and a mid position on the left hand side, a center horizontal or vertical rectangle, and then a mid and low position on the right side. You shoot them in any order, but looking at them, although I usually shoot barricades high to low, there wasn't any benefit in this one, so I just shot it left to right. As far as the rifle setup, since we only had one target, I just went ahead and dialed my elevation in, and then I took the backbone off of this one and I put it on a rectangular bag, which was thin enough to fit through that vertical slot cut in the bag. The tricorn bag was too wide, it wouldn't have fit in there. And the ports that were cut in the middle of the barricade are just plywood. There's no framing around them, so you have a very slim edge to try to balance the rifle out. So something like a Game Changer or any other kind of barricade bag to help kind of wrap around that edge is very beneficial. Additionally, the rectangle bag was flat enough that running on the 2x4 portions of the outer edges of the Barricade made for a pretty stable shooting platform. I stripped the bipod off of it because there was no reason for the bipod to be there. It was just going to get in the way when I went to thread in and out of the port. So jettison that, and that changes the balance a little bit on the rifle since I balanced it out with the bipod on the front, but not a huge amount. For this one, I did manage to get 9 shots off. I only managed 5 hits, though. I think a couple of them I was rushing. I did still have a couple more where I had to recock the bolt, thus running out of time before I got that last shot off. And I knew when I got over to the right-hand side of the Barricade that I was running out of time, so I was rushing it a little bit, and I think that kind of made matters worse. But pretty standard stage. The rifle setup, if I didn't still have the trigger problem sneaking in there, I think would have been golden. It's just a matter of me getting stable and then launching those shots without disrupting the whole setup of the gun. So I pulled the gun back off the stage after that, added a little bit more weight to the trigger, and bear in mind, every time I was doing this, I was slamming the bolt pretty hard and was not getting any striker follow, but I'm trying to do it without disrupting anybody else. I'm trying to do it in a safe manner, so of course muzzle's up instead of muzzle horizontal when I'm doing it, and I believe having the muzzle horizontal would have had a little bit different effect on it. So it took me a couple of tries before I got the trigger set to where the striker was staying cocked on a hard bolt close. So that was stage 8, and then we just stepped over to stage 9, which is the pipe pallet. And the pipe pallet is a really interesting prop because it is a plastic pallet, and then they had several sections of corrugated pipe stacked at various different angles. So some of them were parallel to the bore, some of them were perpendicular to the bore, and there were shooting positions marked off on this. And the pipe diameter was only about that big. So it wasn't a huge stack of pipes, but the corrugation, the size, and the direction that they were set made things kind of difficult. The target was a 40% IPSC at 385 yards. And again, 10 rounds, 1 minute, and 45-second time limit. The directions were: shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand, and upon the command engage target A2 with 2 rounds from each of the 4 marked positions on the pipe pallet, then 2 rounds from the prone position. So this kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in my process because the pipes, I looked at the shape of them, and a Barricade bag like a Game Changer or like the tricorn bag is the way to go with those pipes. The tricorn has the added advantage of I've got a curve on this side to get the pipes that are going parallel to the bore, and then I've got the curve on this side to get the ones that are going perpendicular. So I thought this was going to be the hot ticket for that. Also, the bag gives me enough height that I'm not dragging anything on it. I could still run the bipod forward on the fore end and run the bag on the back of the fore end and have the bipod available for prone. That's really where the difficulty came in, because the tricorn bag is not tall enough to go into the prone position. I still had to have the bipod, so I had to plan ahead. I had to make sure that the legs were deployed to the length that I need, and then fold the legs along the fore end because the long pipe, they would have drug on the long pipe that was parallel to the bore. All the rest of them I could have gotten away with the legs being down, but that one position specifically caused me to have to put the legs up. So I shot through it and got 10 shots off on this one. I only got 5 hits, and I don't believe I got any hits in prone position. I knew, again, I was running short on time when I got down to the prone position, and I am not smooth with kicking the legs out on the SkyPod yet. Harris bipods dominate having to deploy the legs on the clock, because generally you'll tie a sling between the 2 legs, just a piece of 550 cord or something, and you can just grab that and yank it and pop the legs down. And if you already have them set to your height, then it's just a matter of one tug, drop into prone, and you're ready to go. With this, there's no real good way that I found so far to get both legs at the same time. So you have to do them one at a time, and you have to pull down the locking bolt, flip the leg down, make sure it's latched. It does go against a hard stop, so you don't have to worry about not getting it fully into position. So you just pull it back until it hits the stop, let go of the latch. Same thing for the opposite side, and then you're ready to go. However, it is a manual arms that I have not trained on under the clock, so I'm still a little bit slow doing it, and it did cost me some time. So 5 hits, I wasn't too terribly upset about it because my cocking problem was about solved at that point. I think I may have one on there where it didn't go because I did increase the trigger pull weight just a little bit after that whole setup, but I think I got it lined out. After that, we moved over to stage 10, which was right next door, and it's still on the short range, and this one was called tank traps. The target was an 8-inch square at 385 yards, and the directions are the shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand, and upon the command engage, shooter will approach the pair of tank traps and engage target A3 with 2 rounds from each of the 5 marked positions from left to right. In the marked positions were the tank traps were set up with the 2 legs facing you and 1 leg facing downrange. So you had the 2 legs facing you on the first tank trap were marked. Then you had the left leg, the center, and then the right leg for the 3 final positions on the rightmost tank trap. So this one I looked at, and this was a no-brainer for the tricorn bag. This is specifically what the tricorn bag was designed for shooting tank traps. That's why it has the 3 lobes. It's designed to sit down in the apex of the tank trap and give you a very stable position there. But they also put this nice little anti-skid thing here, and it sits on top of the end of the legs of the tank trap very, very well. So again, with it at the balance point on the rifle, I was able to get the rifle up there, drop it in quickly, get the rifle stable, and start getting shots off. Now, unfortunately, I say get the rifle stable and start getting shots off. I got 9 shots off, and I only scored 1 hit on this. So again, no idea what was going on there. I think I was just a little bit too anxious, and I wasn't getting the gun steady enough and letting that wobble area shrink down. Before I triggered it. I think I was trying to save time and get the shots off too early. And the unfortunate thing is a slow hit is worth a whole lot more than a fast miss. So if I slowed down and only got 5 shots off for that whole stage and got 5 hits, I would have done better than getting 9 shots off and only getting 1 hit. The bag worked great. I will use it on tank trap stages again. It was just a matter of me not settling down and getting my shots off. So that was it for the short range for those stages. So the plan was then to go back over and go up and shoot stage 1, which was on our new elevated platforms on the 500-yard line. But stage 1 was backed up a little bit. This is the first match that we've shot on this range setup. It's a brand new shelter, brand new structure, brand new way to go about it. So the original plan, there were 2 stages, stage 1 and stage 2, that were on the elevated platform, and a squad was supposed to go up and shoot both those stages before they came down, and then the next squad go up. This is because moving up and down the stairs caused a little bit of wiggle in the reticle. Not so much actually being on the platform, but that movement up and down. And if you ever shot an elevated platform, it gets you really upset if you're trying to break a shot and somebody else is moving around and wiggling the platform. It's a very stable platform, but again, if people are tromping up and down the stairs with gear and rifles and that, it can cause some issues. So that did cause a little bit of a backup, so I believe that we went to stage 3, which was open at that point, and that was the 400-yard KYL Rack. So this one was a standard KYL rack, but it was not a KYL stage, and KYL stands for Know Your Limits. However, a standard Know Your Limits stage, when you miss, you lose all the points that you accrued to that point. This one you did not. This one you gain points for every hit, and the misses were just 0 points. They didn't actually take your score back to 0. So the directions on this one were shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand, mag out, bolt open, and on the command engage, the shooter will assume the prone position, insert mag, and engage the 400-yard KYL rack with 2 rounds on each target, big to small. Normally, we will start with muzzle up, mag in, bolt back, but because this was actually underneath the elevated platform and there were people overhead, it required a little bit of change. Muzzles were supposed to be down, and you did not load the rifle until you were in position. So just a little bit of a change just to add some safety to things. This one I got 10 shots off, I got 3 hits, and I was starting to notice on the longer range targets that I was missing what should have been really solid shots. So I was trying to pay attention, and as I worked my way through the rack, I started to notice that I had about a half MOA left and half MOA high offset at 500 yards. So I had to hold half left, hold half high, to actually get my hits at that range. Once I got that figured out, I got some hits off of it and came off of it kind of scratching my head because I wasn't sure what happened, why there was any drift. So I'm still not 100% sure because I haven't had a chance to get this back to the range and shoot it to confirm 0. The 0 was dead on after I put the MDT scope mount on it. I checked that. We were good to go. Slipped the turrets to where they should be. And the problem was I didn't get out to the range for about a week and a half. So the rifle sat here in the shop, leaning up against the wall for a week and a half. I don't think anything happened to it here while it was in the shop. However, I did notice a nice little gouge in the barrel that I had no idea where it would have come from. It was deep enough of a gouge that I can actually hook my fingernail on the burr that it raised. So I don't know if while it was in the rack, it took a hit from somewhere. That should not have thrown the 0 off. But I don't really know anything else to attribute it to. So I've got a little bit more research to do on that and figure out why I had that deviation, but the deviation held for the rest of the match. So it's just something I have to go back and try to figure out. I may never figure it out. I'm just going to go back and recheck all the torque on everything and then re-zero it. But it brings up a good learning point when you notice something like that, because it can happen in a match. A rifle can get kicked over, a rifle can get knocked over, you can slam it on a barricade, maybe you didn't have your mounts tight enough, that kind of thing. You need to be able to recognize the directional offset, the reason you're missing, and you need to roll from there. And this stage was a great one to do it because I was prone, the rear of the rifle was bagged in, so I was as stable as I could be at any other point during the match, and you start with a really big meaty plate, and then you start to go down to smaller and smaller plates. And if you had a drastic offset, because the plate rack is fairly wide and the plates are arrayed at the same level, you could have the possibility to miss one plate and hit another plate, and that would tell you where that impact was. Spot it through the scope, make your offset, and roll. So I got a little bit of information on that. It kind of helped me out. Still kind of bummed that I only got 3 hits on a prone stage at 500 yards. So that really irritated me a little bit. This rifle is capable of much better than that, but apparently I was not on that day. The next stage from there, I believe we then went up to stage 1 on the elevated platform for the 500-yard KYL. Now this one screwed me up just a little bit because I went from shooting the KYL rack on the ground from big to small and then big to small, but the elevated one, the 500-yard rack, the directions were shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand, mag out, bolt open, and on command engage. The shooter will assume the prone position, insert mag, and engage the KYL rack atop the 500-yard berm from large to small 2 times through, hit or miss, move to the next target. So, I take that back. I misspoke. The 400-yard, we shot 2 shots on each one. So 2 shots on the big, then move to the next smaller, 2 shots, and then next smaller, 2 shots. The 500-yard, you go big to small, and then big to small again. There was a mix-up between the spotter and me and that, and so that threw a little bit of a loop through it, but we got it sorted out on the clock, unfortunately, and while we were running it. So that's one of those, it really pays to make sure you read the stage description right before you go up and make sure that everybody's on the same sheet of music. It really wasn't that big of a deal, but it throws a little bit of a hiccup in it. Now, I did get all 10 shots off. I believe I got about 6 hits because, again, I was going through and trying to make sure that that offset that I saw in the previous rack was still the offset I needed. And once I got that, I got down, and even the smaller targets, I was able to hit them. So not a big deal there. It was just now I had to realize that half MOA offset was what I needed to keep in mind for the rest of the match. Then we moved over to the left on the same platform and shot Dogtown, which is stage 2. This was a really fun stage because the targets were silhouette poppers, and they were arrayed kind of at an angle across the range in front of us. At 200 yards, 300 yards, and 350 yards, you had prairie dog poppers. And then at 425 yards and 500 yards, you had a standard round popper. And these were not huge targets. Again, time limit was minute 45 seconds, and the directions were shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand. Upon command engage, shooter will assume the prone position and engage the prairie dogs / poppers from near to far, which was right to left, with 2 rounds each. This is kind of nice because at the angle you were at and with the targets on the ground, then you can see your misses. You get that splash in the grass, and because you get 2 shots on each, when you see a miss, you can get your offset, you can get on the target, and you can roll on to the next one. So again, now I kind of had an idea of what was going on with the scope. I got 10 shots off. I got 7 hits pretty rapidly. I shanked 1 or 2 that I probably could have gotten a little bit better, but that was acceptable performance to me, and I came off that stage feeling kind of okay about it. Then we went back down to the ground level, and we had stage 4, which was Cattle Gate. And the target for Cattle Gate was a 50% IPSC target at 425 yards. The directions were, shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand. On command engage, the shooter will engage target B1 with 2 rounds from each of the 4 marked positions from top to bottom on the Cattle Gate, and then 2 rounds from the prone position within the side rails of the Cattle Gate. So this was kind of an interesting setup. I got 8 shots off. I did not get to the prone stage. Again, I went ahead and used the Now on this one, I did use the actual tricorn bag on the backbone, on the chassis. Again, ran the bipod forward, folded the legs, set at a distance that I figured would be acceptable for this. And one additional change I made was I took the scope shade off. I didn't want the tube on here because cattle gates, you have a tendency to get the rifle in kind of sideways to make it easier to maneuver that bipod and everything through, and then you stand the rifle up. If your bag is too tall on the bottom of it and you stand it up with the scope tube in here, the scope shade, then what you can actually do is mash that scope shade or twist it off the front of the scope, because there's a lot of pressure between the bars on that. You're not going to bend the bars. They're there. But you may have enough pressure against the bottom of the forend and the top of the scope to wrench that off and possibly change your zero on your scope. So I take that off just to give myself a little bit extra working room. The sun was not low enough in the horizon to make the sunshade necessary. So I just took it off to be on the safe side. I do not know how many shots I got on that. I think I got 4 or 5 shots, or I'm sorry, I got 8 shots off. I think I got 4 or 5 hits on it, but I wasn't happy with the fact that I timed out before I even got to the prone stage. So as I was walking back, I was running my process over my head. I didn't hear the call from the spotter, and I didn't write it down in the book as to how many hits I got. I haven't gone back and looked that back up on practice score yet. But the cattle gate, again, just was not getting as stable as I really wanted to get. I probably should have gone ahead and used a pump pillow in the rear in addition to the tricorn bag in the front, just to kind of stabilize both sides of the rifle instead of trying to balance it on the middle. And then movement from position to position could have been smoother. I was not as smooth getting the rifle out of one section of the gate and into the next. So it had horizontal bars all the way down, so you had to pull the rifle totally out and thread it back through. So when we talk about suppressors, one of the big drawbacks of suppressors instead of a brake on a rifle like this is that would have added a significant extra amount of distance to the rifle and would have had to move my body back in order to get the rifle out and thread it into the next and then have to reset the position. So it's a little bit of extra added movement that when you add it up over 4 different steps, that ends up being a lot of extra movement and it costs you a lot of time. Again, I got down to the end. I went to deploy the legs on the bipod and I had like 5 seconds left, so I didn't even bother to chamber around. I just stopped, dropped my magazine, and the stage was over. So again, I need to practice deploying the bipod on the clock, and I definitely need to practice threading the rifle in and out of those barricades, because a heavy rig like this now gives you a little bit added difficulty. It's not as light to throw around as a lightweight target rig. So the cattle gate was fairly straightforward, but a lot of these, it makes it really interesting because you do have to use 2 different support devices. You have to use some kind of bag in the front, and you have to use a bipod for the prone. If you tried to go with a really tall bag on this one, it just wasn't going to work for you for the gate because there was no support in there. You had to have a pretty small barricade bag to not build it up enough that you started causing problems with your scope on the rails. And then if that was a low profile bag, it was too low to go prone with it. So that was kind of an interesting problem that you had to solve with your rifle setup. Then we moved on to stage 5, which was Drum-Tenna. This was kind of a fun stage because we had a 50-gallon drum turned on its side, a plastic drum, and then we had an antenna section that was leaning on top the drum and then leaning on the ground at the bottom end. This one was a little bit tricky because you couldn't really load the rifle in any one of those positions, and if you were free recoiling it, you had to be careful that you didn't knock the antenna off of the barrel while you were doing it, because nothing was staked in, nothing was tied down. So the target was a 10-inch square at 450 yards, and for this the shooter will start in the start box with all gear in hand, and on command engage, shoot target B2 with 2 rounds from each of the 4 marked positions on the barrel and antenna from left to right, then 2 rounds from the prone position again. So this one had 3 different positions that you had to prepare for. You had to prepare for the barrel, which bipod really wasn't usable on the barrel because it was set horizontally in front of you. So you had the round portion of the barrel. It wasn't wide enough to get a bipod and a rear bag on. Then you had the antenna section, which was very narrow. It was just basically a pole that you had to set the rifle on. And then finally, you had to prepare for the prone position. So you have 1 position on the barrel, 3 on the antenna, and then 1 prone position. So for this one, again, I set up the tricorn bag for the barrel and the antenna stages, and then the bipod for the prone. This one, I got all 10 shots off. I got 5 hits on it. The antenna was moving quite a bit, and then when I finally got prone, this was one of the few times where I was able to get the bipod deployed, get everything lined back up, got ready to go, and then just was at the end of my time and rushed the shots from the prone. There's always a balance with these kind of stages where there's a prone stage at the end, because the prone is going to be your most stable, but you don't want to blow shots before the prone just to race to the prone to get your 2 hits. So you want to try to utilize your time wisely, but you don't want to spend so much time on the other positions that you don't get to the prone, because the prone usually is the 2 easy hits. So this one didn't work out the greatest for me, but at least half my shots impacted with targets. So that was good to go. I did watch one shooter actually push the antenna section off of the drum. I'm not sure how I feel about that, because while it does add to the difficulty of it, it also kind of starts to pose a little bit of a safety concern, because you push it off, you nosedive that muzzle into the dirt, crank a round off, or when you go to catch the rifle, when it starts to slide forward and crank a round off in the ground in front of you. Not only is that a DQ for the shooter and he has to go home, but it could be a safety issue for anyone else on the line. So you have to balance that difficulty with safety. I think next time I would recommend that we anchor that antenna section in so it can't fall off the barrel and isn't at risk of any of that. Then we moved over to stage 6, which was tires, and tires had a 50% IPSC target at 400 yards. The time limit were still 1:45 for the time, 10 rounds. The directions were: shooter will start standing in the start box with all gear in hand, and upon the command engage target B3 with 2 rounds from each of the 4 marked position on the tires, left to right, and then 2 shots from the prone position. I'm not going to harp on the prone position anymore, other than the fact that I needed to run a bipod on it. Ran the bipod, ran the tricorn bag, and the tires are large tractor tires, and several of them were laid on the sides, and one was laid vertically. Now, vertical, it can be easy to shoot with the bipod if you can get the bipod back far enough and you can get a bag underneath your pistol grip. But I find with a vertical tire, I just like to run the bipod really far forward so it doesn't interfere with anything, and run a mid bag or a barricade bag in the center of the rifle, and then just support the rifle over the center of that bag. I find that works best for me because that was kind of the more difficult of the positions. I set up for that, and then the rest of them I just kind of made do. The tricorn bag is high enough that as long as the bipod was folded, I didn't interfere with the rifle on any of the other positions. This one I got 8 shots off. I did not get to the prone position on it, and I got 6 hits. So not too terrible. Again, I wasted a lot of time moving from position to position. If I was a little bit smoother, I would have moved through quickly, got the bipod deployed, and got my prone shots. But the nice thing was it really anchored in what I needed to work on. So that was our last stage in this kind of round robin thing. And when I came off of it, I had a good deal of things to look at and things to fix before the next match. So first of all, equipment. The trigger is going to have to go heavier, or I'm going to have to pull the trigger tech and go with another trigger. That is not a problem that is unheard of with Remington 700s. The dimensions of the cocking piece can be all over the board. That's one of the reasons that Trigger Tech doesn't make the diamond for the Remington 700, is because those dimensions have to be very precise in order for the trigger to function at that light of pull weight. If I get a ganky Remington 700 that has a weird cocking piece on it, a lot of times I can go to just a 2-stage trigger and I can get a heavier first stage and second stage combined weight that will make me feel like I have a really light trigger, but I'm still actually moving that sear for the first movement of the trigger, and then just a little bit of extra press to break the shot. So I think the Trigger Tech will probably work fine on this. I think I've got it lined out, but I have to take it to the range. I have to do some abuse on the bolt handle and on the rifle itself to make sure that we don't have any problems with the striker falling again. And then I'm going to throw the trigger pull gauge on it and see where we end up. As long as we're not over 2.5 pounds or so, I think we're going to be fine. But it was just a little bit too light for this setup the way it was at the match. So that is item number 1 to change. Item number 2, I actually ripped a very good chunk of skin out of my thumb on the Tango 6 here. SIG puts this really, really aggressive checkering on the magnification ring. I'm not sure if I really like that. It's drawn blood more than a couple of times. Additionally, when you are at full magnification, the magnification indicator is right here at the bolt knob. I really wish they switched the direction the magnification goes so that high magnification, the indicator would be on the left-hand side of the scope. Now, if you're lefties, this works out just fine because it's on the other side, but for right-handed shooters, that can be a problem. The knurling I don't think has to be anywhere near this aggressive. They could have just gone with standard fluting to match the ring that they have at the front. It would still look very nice. It would be aesthetically pleasing, but you would not take off large chunks of skin on it. Now the other way I could solve this is instead of using a bolt lift, I can actually put a longer extended bolt handle on here so I'm farther out on it and away from the scope. The scope mount is already fairly high, so a higher scope mount is not something I want to go with. But that is an option, putting a longer bolt handle on. I just don't like getting really long bolt handles because then they stick out, they can get caught on things. It can end up being a failure point later on because you are just dealing with smaller threads here and you're dealing with a brazed on bolt handle. So I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to address that yet. For a while, I'm just going to try to push with my thumb instead of wrapping my thumb over when I close the bolt. And hopefully that will keep me far enough away from this through dry fire training that I don't get chewed up. I haven't gotten chewed up through dry fire previously, but apparently just when I'm on the clock on the barricades, I like to wrap my thumb over instead of push from the back, and that got me. So those are the main changes on the rifle. There really isn't anything else that I need to change on it. Now, one really interesting thing is the Tango 6 that I have here is a minute angle scope, and I am used to mils. The reason that this is on this rifle, actually, this scope started out on the 1022 NRL rifle, and my good friend at SIG Optics sent me the mil version of the scope. Actually, it was the 5-30 version, but he sent me the mil version so I didn't have to goof around with remembering my 22 holdovers in MOA and in mil. Well, when I put this thing together, had this beautiful scope hanging around, I decided I was going to actually try to make minute angle work for me. And I think I am still going to work on it a little bit. There is no conversion. Let's get that right off the table. There's no conversion going back and forth between mil or minute angle. It's just what switch you turn on your ballistic computer to give you the output in mils or the output in minute angle. The difficult part is switching it in my brain, and when I look at the reticle, having my eyeballs know what tick marks on the reticle correspond to what adjustments. So the reticle in the Tango 6 does not have a lot of numbers marking on it. So I have to consistently go back and try to remember what hash marks correspond to what, if they're a half mil or if they are full mil. I'm sorry, see, I'm even doing it here. If they're a half MOA or if they're a full MOA or if it's a 5 MOA mark or a 2 MOA. This one actually runs in even increments. So I have to remember it's a 4 MOA mark or 8 MOA mark, and it just really started to goof with me a little bit. And additionally, the turrets are a 30 MOA per rev turret, so that gives you a lot of really fine clicks in it. So when I had the turret unlocked and I was dialing through, very often it took me a little bit longer than I wanted to get exactly to the dope that I wanted. Now, in reality, if you're a quarter MOA one way or the other, it's probably not going to turn a hit into a miss at a 500-yard match, but you still want to try to be as exact as possible when you're dialing your dope. And I really like wider clicks, so more movement of the knob to get that click. Because it's fairly easy to look at the numbers and buzz the turret to the numbers, but then getting those last couple of clicks, you don't want to have to jiggle it back and forth. And there's a little bit of lash on the SIG turret. You don't want to have to jiggle it back and forth to make sure you have the right line locked up. So that was just my little bit of issues with this. I would have preferred just to look through the scope and use the reticle as holdovers for quite a few of the stages, but because I didn't have confidence in my ability to do this on the MOA reticle right now, then I dialed for pretty much everything I could dial for the whole match. So hopefully I will get a little bit more time on this reticle doing holdovers and get a little bit more comfortable with it before I decide to swap it out. The other option is I may just go ahead and pull this off of here, put this on an NRL 22 rig, and then run the 5 to 30 on this. That would probably be the smarter one because it is a mil scope and it does have the higher magnification for longer range stages when we get out to some of the longer range national matches this year. So that is squaring things away on the rifle itself. Now, moreover, squaring things away on me, I need to get out and I need to practice moving the rifle around on the barricades. Getting stable and then dry firing and getting that shot off, that really is necessary. Getting the rifle stable quickly and then having the discipline not to crank the shot right away, but making sure that wobble area is staying on your target before you break the shot. Because if the wobble area is going off your target, ganking the trigger is just going to guarantee that you have a miss. So I need to get a little bit quicker with moving the rifle from step to step and then slowing down and getting that accurate shot off. And that's just going to be me going out to the range, getting on our obstacles, and doing some dry fire. Unfortunately, right now our 500-yard line is not open for regular members to shoot whenever they want. It's sanctioned events only, and that's where a lot of our barricades and a lot of our stuff is set up at. But I may be able to go back there and do some dry fire without any ammunition anywhere around and not have a problem. So that we will see. Otherwise, my other option is I can just set some barricades up in my backyard and have fun there. You can get a ton of work with dry fire without putting a lot of wear and tear on the rifle itself. So overall, the match ran very well. It was really, really enjoyable. I had missed our local matches for quite some time, so hopefully I'm going to get out this year and try to run the whole season. I'm sure there will be a couple that I'll have to miss for various other training and work-related issues. But I will be interested to see as we go along if I can knock the cobwebs back out and get back into fighting shape again. So we'll see. And that's going to do it for this Mail Call Mondays. Again, I apologize for getting it out so late in the week, but I wanted to leave you guys with an episode and not just skip it this week. If you guys have any questions or comments over anything on the rifle or anything that I've discussed, please go ahead and leave it in the comments section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you like the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to click that little bell icon so you get notified when we release new episodes. I do want to let you know the tumblers are still on sale. We have a link down below, so if you want to pick up one of these awesome tumblers from Red Ghost Engraving, they're $25 and proceeds help to support the show that you know and love. I also want to thank our Patreon subscribers. Thank you guys very much for supporting the show. If you want to have a little bit of an inside look into what we do here and what we have coming up, please check out Patreon. We would love to have you as a supporter over there. And until next time, get out and shoot.